Striped bass. No other North American bass lives like this one. A striped bass can spend years roaming the Atlantic Ocean, then return to the exact river system where it was born to spawn. That remarkable journey is called anadromy, a life cycle divided between freshwater and saltwater, and everything about the species is adapted for it. Each spring, adults swim into flowing rivers to reproduce. Their eggs don't settle on the bottom, like those of many freshwater fish. Instead, they remain suspended in the current, where constant water movement keeps them from sinking into sediment and suffocating before they hatch 2 to 4 days later. After hatching, juveniles spend their first 2 to 4 years growing in brackish estuaries, such as Chesapeake Bay, before joining the adults on their long coastal migrations. Striped bass are powerful, opportunistic predators. Menhaden, anchovies, crabs, squid, and worms all make up their diet. Large individuals often trap baitfish against shorelines, bridge pilings, or the water's surface, striking with enough force to be heard from a passing boat. They regularly reach 50 to 60 pounds, and some live for nearly 30 years. Not every striped bass follows this ocean-going lifestyle. Populations isolated by dams in places such as Lake Texoma, the Arkansas and Colorado rivers, and South Carolina's Lake Marion, adapted to complete their entire lives in freshwater, never entering the ocean at all. Despite its success, the species nearly disappeared. By the early 1980s, overfishing and habitat degradation had pushed Atlantic striped bass populations into steep decline. In response, Maryland and Virginia imposed fishing moratoriums, and Congress passed the Atlantic Striped Bass Conservation Act in 1984, requiring coordinated management across every Atlantic coastal state. The recovery was extraordinary. By 1989, Chesapeake Bay surveys recorded the strongest juvenile reproduction in nearly 2 decades. By 1995, the stock was officially declared restored, after increasing roughly tenfold in little more than a decade, one of the greatest conservation success stories in American fisheries management. While striped bass recovered from collapse, its smaller relative faced the opposite problem: white bass. When white bass start feeding, the surface of an entire lake can erupt. Dozens of fish charge upward at once, trapping schools of shad against the surface, in a feeding frenzy anglers call a jump. It's one of the most explosive hunting events in freshwater fishing. Unlike striped bass, white bass spend their entire lives in inland lakes and rivers. They hunt in tight, coordinated schools, surrounding bait fish and driving them upward before striking together. Every spring, those same schools leave open water and surge upriver to spawn over gravel and rocky bottoms, a migration so predictable that entire fishing seasons are planned around it. It's a relatively small member of the family. Most live only about 5 years and rarely exceed 2 pounds. One of the easiest ways to tell it apart from a striped bass is by looking at its tongue. White bass have a single tooth patch, while striped bass have 2. That efficiency as a predator also made it a problem outside its native range. After being introduced into Utah Lake, white bass multiplied rapidly and came to dominate the fish community, consuming so much of the available forage that other species struggled to compete. When the species threatened to spread into California's Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta through the Tulare Lake Basin, officials responded with one of the largest chemical fish eradication projects ever carried out in the United States. Roughly $7.5 million was spent to stop a single species before it could establish itself downstream. White bass became an invasive predator, but one of its closest relatives took competition even further. It targeted white bass before they even hatched. Yellow bass. This is the only true bass known to raid another bass's spawning grounds and eat its eggs. Yellow bass is the smallest member of the true bass family in North America, rarely exceeding a pound. Its brassy yellow body and broken, offset dark stripes make it easy to distinguish from every other species in the family. But what really sets it apart is how unstable its populations can be. In just a few years, a lake can go from having almost no yellow bass to being overrun by thousands of stunted fish, only for the population to crash again soon after. Part of that boom and bust cycle comes at the expense of its closest relatives. In Kentucky's Barren River, researchers found yellow bass arriving at white bass spawning grounds shortly after the white bass began reproducing. More than 20% of the yellow bass examined had white bass eggs or larvae in their stomachs. They're not just competing for the same habitat, they're reducing each other's chances of reproducing. The two species are even closely related enough to occasionally hybridize where their ranges overlap. One true bass spends part of its life in the ocean. Another became an invasive predator. Yellow bass attacks the next generation before it even hatches. The next species has a different problem entirely. Despite its name, it isn't a perch, and it never was. White perch. White perch isn't a perch. It never was. Despite its name, it's actually one of the 6 true bass species, making it the smallest and most coastal adapted member of the family. Native to Atlantic estuaries from Nova Scotia to South Carolina, it can move between fresh and salt water, much like its larger relative, the striped bass. It hunts opportunistically, feeding on small fish, insects, and crustaceans. Reproduction is simple compared to the rest of the family. Each spring, females scatter their eggs across the bottom, with no nest, no guarding, and no parental care. Depending on water temperature, those eggs can hatch in as little as a day. Most white perch live only 5 to 7 years. Within its native range, it's a popular food fish, valued for its mild flavor. Outside that range, it can become a serious problem. Introduced into freshwater lakes and reservoirs, white perch often reproduce so successfully that they overpopulate, stunt their own growth, and feed heavily on the eggs of native game fish. In Ontario's Bay of Quinte, their rapid population growth is believed to have contributed to the collapse of the region's walleye fishery. The species has another distinction. It's responsible for the first naturally documented hybrid within the genus Morone, crossing with white bass in western Lake Erie and the connected Detroit and St. Clair rivers since the early 1980s. So far, every member of this family has evolved naturally. The next one didn't. It exists only because humans created it. The wiper. This fish doesn't exist in the wild. Humans created it. In the 1960s, hatchery biologists crossed a female striped bass with a male white bass, hoping to combine the striped bass's size with the white bass's hardiness. The hybrid was originally known as the palmetto cross, but today, it's more commonly called the wiper, a name derived from white bass and striper. Depending on where it's stocked, you might also hear it called sunshine bass, palmetto bass, or white rock bass. The hybrid inherited the best traits of both parents. It grows faster and larger than a pure white bass, commonly exceeding 5 pounds, while retaining the aggressive, schooling behavior that makes both parent species effective predators. When wipers find a school of shad, they often drive the bait fish to the surface in explosive feeding frenzies known as busting, making them one of the most popular targets for anglers using topwater lures. The current world record weighed 27 pounds 5 ounces, caught in Arkansas's Greers Ferry Lake in 1997. The hybrid also became far more than a fisheries experiment. During the striped bass population collapse of the 1980s, commercial demand shifted toward farm-raised alternatives. Hybrid striped bass proved well-suited to aquaculture, and today that industry is the 4th largest finfish farming sector in the United States, generating roughly $50 million annually. The same conservation crisis that nearly wiped out wild striped bass helped create a thriving commercial industry built around a fish that never existed in nature. The final member of the true bass family isn't a hybrid at all. It's a wild species from the other side of the Atlantic, and you may have already eaten it without knowing its real name. European sea bass. You've probably eaten this fish without ever hearing its real name. In North America, it's sold almost exclusively under its Italian market name, Branzino. Cross the Atlantic, and the true bass family switches genus entirely. Not Morone anymore, but Dicentrarchus. Not freshwater rivers, but the open Mediterranean and the northeastern Atlantic coast, from Norway down to Senegal. It lives slower than its American relatives. It doesn't reach sexual maturity until somewhere between 4 and 8 years old, and it can live to 25. Its life cycle runs the exact opposite direction of a striped bass's, catadromus instead of anadromus. Adults live mostly at sea, then move into estuaries, lagoons, and river mouths to feed, tolerating a wide range of salinity along the way, before heading back to open water each spring to spawn in batches from March through June. It hunts small fish and crustaceans in loose social shoals, and it was the first non-salmon marine fish ever farmed successfully at commercial scale in Europe. Now one of the most economically important aquaculture species in the entire Mediterranean, alongside a smaller, closely related cousin, the spotted sea bass, that rounds out the family's 6th and final species. And even this fish isn't immune to the pattern running through this entire family. Recent records show European sea bass turning up in the northern Red Sea, having found its own way through the Suez Canal. One more true bass, one more continent, quietly expanding into water it was never originally part of. Spotted sea bass. The final member of the true bass family is also one of its least familiar. The spotted sea bass is the smaller of the 2 European bass species, rarely exceeding 3 feet in length or 20 pounds. At first glance, it closely resembles the European sea bass, but its body is covered with distinct dark spots scattered across the sides and upper flanks, a feature that gives the species its common name. Its range is far more limited than its larger relative, occurring mainly along the eastern Atlantic coast of Africa, from Morocco to Angola, as well as around the Canary Islands, Madeira, and Cape Verde. Like the European sea bass, it inhabits coastal waters, estuaries, lagoons, and river mouths, feeding on small fish, crustaceans, and cephalopods. Compared with the European sea bass, however, the spotted sea bass remains much less studied. It supports only small local fisheries and has never achieved the same commercial or aquaculture importance as its larger relative. With that, the true bass family comes to an end. Just 6 species, spread across 2 genera on opposite sides of the Atlantic. From striped bass migrating thousands of miles between rivers and the sea, to human-created hybrids, invasive egg raiders, and European sea bass quietly expanding into new waters, every member of the family followed a different evolutionary path. Despite sharing the same ancestry,